agreement EU-Morocco. I give the floor to Mr. Bové, rapporteur, for 4 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Commissaire.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, the agreement between Morocco and the EU is supposed to protect the economy in Morocco as well, but unfortunately it's completely to the detriment of family farming, fishing in Morocco. It's totally unsustainable because there's a complete imbalance in the benefits. The prices of vegetables and fruit, there's a huge disparity in the prices in Morocco and the prices in Europe. There is no trade union rights for people in Morocco. The minimum wage is about €5 per day, whereas it's about €50 per day in Spain. So how on earth can you compete with that social dumping? We need to make sure that there are trade union rights. There's child labour as well that we've got to see as a priority. We've got to take these into account when we have any agreements with Morocco. There's a total dysfunction of the import prices. There's a lack of customs revenue. There's fraud. The Commission has got to tackle these problems before it comes up with a new agreement. In Morocco, the management of export quotas is very beneficial to the large groups. The whole market is split up, is held by 3 main producers. There's a fund, a financial fund called Tiris Euro Arab, which was granted 700,000 hectares in the south of Morocco to plant citrus fruits and market garden crops. This is extremely shocking. This is happening on a large scale in Morocco. It's not just close to home. In Morocco, production of tomatoes is very important, but the water table is getting lower every single year. Also, there's the coastal groundwaters which are being depleted. Salinization is the result of all of this. What about the drinking water for local populations? If you export 250,000 tons of tomatoes, you might as well be exporting 25 million cubic meters of water. This is something that we've got to focus on. We've got to also focus on impact studies. These studies are important so that the EP can pronounce a judgment in full possession of the facts. We haven't had a sustainable impact assessment or an impact assessment of the environment, social impact. This is something that we need to have. Several states, including the USA, have signed free trade agreements with Morocco and have excluded the Western Sahara. This position was taken so as not to influence the outcome of international negotiations being held by the United Nations to try and find a peaceable solution to the conflict between the two parties. The Commission and the Parliament's legal service hold diverging views on this, but we've got to ensure that we remain in line with international treaties. We're all bound by those treaties. The rejection of this agreement by the European Parliament is necessary. It will allow us to reopen negotiations on the basis of a new platform. We've got to send out a very strong signal. We're doing this to the Commission. We want the Commission to change its methodology. It's got to introduce European Parliament participation much further upstream. The Commission has got to make sure we've got serious impact studies on the environmental, economic and social impact and also budgetary impact. We can't accept any more that the European Parliament can only say yes or no and no more than that. I'd like to inform you that unlike the opinion adopted by the Agricultural Committee, which was negative on this agreement, the recommendation of the International Trade Committee is to approve the agreement between Morocco and the EU. I have to say this publicly. Colleagues, given the arguments that I've just presented to you, you will understand then why I'm appealing to you very clearly to vote against the ratification of this agreement. It's not simply just in the interest of European farmers who are unanimously against all of these provisions, but it's also in the interest of farmers in Morocco who today see they're being robbed of their own land by the large producers. There are economic imbalances, their capacity to produce dairy products and meat and cereals are being completely destroyed by the large European groups. So I urge you to reject this record. It's a bad agreement, and we're talking about the extension of this agreement, and I would like you to reject that in the interest of farmers on both sides of the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bové. Now I give the floor to Mr. Nicolai Wammen on behalf of the Council.
Dear President of the European Parliament, honourable members, Commissioner, in an evolving southern neighbourhood, Morocco has remained a key partner of the European Union, and in line with the rapid changes taking place in the region, Morocco is undertaking substantial political and economic reforms. As you know, a new constitution was approved in July. Free and fair elections took place in November, and now the new government is taking the reform agenda forward. Major efforts are being made towards the consolidation of democracy and the rule of law, as well as towards a sustainable and inclusive development. They deserve our full support, not only because this is in our strategic and economic interest, but also because we have committed ourselves to it. You will remember that last spring both the Council and the European Parliament agreed to be much more responsive to the efforts of our partners. We must now all work together to ensure delivery on the ground. One of the key features we can offer Morocco in the long term is progressive and deep economic integration with the EU internal market. And in the meantime, we need to look at trade measures that can be introduced rapidly and that can be beneficial for both sides. This is what we can offer Morocco today, with the agricultural liberalisation agreement, which is the subject of today's debate and the vote soon to be. The entry into force of this agreement would represent a significant step forward for the overall bilateral relations between the EU and Morocco. And it would demonstrate that the European Union is indeed delivering on its promise to support economic development in the region through increased trade opportunities. Needless to say, our southern partners have not forgotten that our renewed approach towards the southern neighbourhood includes increased market access, and they will hold us to our word. But we should not forget that this agreement is also in our own interest. That is why it was approved by a united Council. Morocco will make extensive moves to open its markets to EU products, and this agreement will immediately liberalise 45% of EU export, by value increasing over time to 70%. It will provide new opportunities for EU exporters. Mr. President, honourable members, Commissioner, this agreement is a result of sustained dialogue and combined efforts. Concessions have been made on both sides, and any blockage at this stage could have serious consequences for our relations with Morocco, in particular with regard to the continuation of the ongoing negotiations on liberalisation of services and mobility partnership. In the same way, the adoption of the recommendation of Mrs. Nitz on the protocol on the Europe-Mediterranean Agreement covering the general principles for Morocco's participation in EU programmes this morning makes an important new stage in our bilateral relations. It gives Morocco the right to take part in a range of current and future community programmes. This is very much to be welcomed. By giving your consent also to the trade agreement tomorrow, this Parliament will serve to underline that the EU stands by its firm commitments. It will show that we support the ambitions for reform for our partners in the southern Mediterranean, and that we demonstrate that support in very practical and concrete ways. Honourable members, Mr. President, Commissioner, this is the time for the EU to act. This is the time for us to show that we do mean business, but also that we do mean that we stand by our words to Northern Africa and to the process taking place there right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wammen. I give the floor to Mr. Commissioner Cioloș.
I'd like to thank you for your contributions to the debate in the consultation phase on this important agreement with Morocco. And I welcome this step forward, which allows us, through the Lisbon Treaty, to have an open and transparent discussion on something as significant as a trade agreement. Let me just say something about the substance of the agreement first of all, and then I'll be happy to answer the specific questions that you've put about this agreement recently. Now, Morocco is not just any old partner. It's an important political and in human terms, and they've enjoyed the advanced status with the EU since 2008. They have shown a willingness to align with the EU and continue this move, particularly by aligning their agricultural policy with the acquis communautaire. Against the backdrop of the Arab Spring, our partnership will deepen further in order to maintain democratic impetus and improve economic situation in the agricultural sector. Now, of course, this agreement means that the EU has commitments in terms of developing the agricultural sector. Morocco has a green plan aimed at small farms and local farming, and these are a key part of guaranteeing food supply and the economic fabric of this country. These are very important issues for me, and I can tell you that I am following this issues personally. Coming to the specifics of the agreement now, I think this is an important pillar of the advanced status that Morocco enjoys, something that we've been working on for a number of years now. This agreement, which I commend to you, is a balanced one, which opens up trade prospects for the EU agricultural sector. I think that liberalisation is important not only here with Morocco, but also in terms of our other agreements. Now, I understand that some concerns have been aired, but I hope that over the last few weeks do them. But let me just say a couple of specific things. On fruit and vegetables, let me tell you that this really was dealt with as a sensitive issue during the negotiations. The agreement has provisions in it aimed at maintaining tomato, cucumber, courgette, garlic and strawberry production in the EU. These products will not be liberalised as a result of this agreement. On health and safety, let me emphasise the fact that consumer health is not negotiable, and Morocco has taken its commitments very seriously, as has been shown by the last inspections made by the Food and Veterinary Office of the EU. Indeed, they were in February. The EU is offering technical assistance aimed at administrative capacity building in Morocco. The agreement is going to open up further bilateral cooperation avenues, as well as health and safety and plant health measures. All of this is included in the agreement. Let me also reassure you that the Commission will be monitoring both the volumes imported as well as the quality and the food safety for these sensitive products. Morocco wants to open up a geographical indication negotiation. Morocco's made a commitment on that, and that goes in the direction of a quality-based policy, which is something that's very close to my heart. Now, I've heard a number of people concerned about entry price in the fruit and vegetable market. Let me just tell you that as part of the CAP reform, we have a mechanism which will see the entry price system working a little bit better than so far, which is what you called for. The proposal's already before the Council and the Parliament as part of the reform. The Parliament wants a strong resolution, but let me reassure you that the European Commission will come back to you with a monitoring report on all of the subjects that you've raised. Let me again commend this report, this agreement with Morocco to you, which is an important political and economic partner south of the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. I give the floor to Mr. Lorenzo Fontana.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Commissioner. What Mr. Bové has already said really sums it all up. I'm here as draftsman for opinion in the Agriculture Committee, and the majority of colleagues in that committee voted against the agreement. Because, Commissioner, I've listened to your explanations, and I have to say that there's an element of truth in what you've told us, but when we looked at this in agriculture, we felt it didn't address our main concerns, and our main concerns are twofold. First of all, small-scale farmers in Morocco aren't being helped by this, and secondly, as far as farmers in Spain and southern Italy, and particularly Sicily, are concerned, they are going to have to deal with unfair competition which could well destroy our whole fruit and vegetable sector. We're terrified of this prospect. This is supposed to help small farmers, but it's going to help multinationals who produce in Morocco using underpaid workers or even slaves, and it won't actually help the small-scale farmers, which the EU ought to be trying to help, and of course it won't help us protect human rights, which we go on so much about in this place as well.
I give the floor to Mrs. Cristiana MUSCARDINI. 2 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. The agreement with trade agreement, which is significant in political terms too. Morocco, in that part of the Mediterranean, is the only country which has tried to improve its own constitution. The recent elections have shown that all political forces want to listen to one another, so the Kingdom of Morocco for us in Europe is a stable element and a door to the continent of Africa, a continent which is under an enormous excessive market pressure, partly due to Chinese expansionism. We should be worried about those, and those who talk about slaves should bear it in mind as well. This agreement is dreadful. It's a terrible agreement, as Mr. Bové has said, because it doesn't allow Europe to carry out the requisite tests and inspections. This agreement shows that the new focus that Europe has on the development of the Mediterranean has to go along with helping democratic reforms and economic recovery in these countries. That's the only way we can stop so many young people being obliged to leave those countries and come to Europe. There should be synergy as far as Europe and the Maghreb is concerned, our natural economic partner and our neighbour. And if this agreement means we have to make another step in European policy and be more sensitive to the needs of the Euro-Mediterranean area. We understand the concerns of certain farming sectors, but I'm sure that the Commission will ultimately find the right support measures if necessary. Remember, as some instruments such as entry prices for sensitive products, and they're a kind of safeguard measure as far as certain elements in European production is concerned. I would suggest that if the impact studies show genuine problems in the sectors involved in the agreement, that the Commission could bear them in mind when it revises the CAP. Thanks very much, President.
Mrs. Muscardini. I give the floor to Mrs. Véronique De KEYSER.
Morocco is the 130th country in terms of development. It's a long way behind Tunisia, Syria and others. The revenue per inhabitant is half of what it is in Turkey. So, in other words, it's a poor country. That just about sums it up. It's a poor country, and when it comes to the spring revolutions, didn't defend itself necessarily that badly. The democratic reforms in Morocco need to go a lot further. However, those that have been initiated, we want to make sure that it's not just window dressing. The results of the elections were largely honoured, so there have been improvements. Now, we've talked about the stumbling blocks that are in front of Morocco at the moment. If we get rid of those stumbling blocks, then it will develop further. But does this agreement allow us to do that? I don't think so. We're talking about Moroccan tomatoes at the moment. Yes, okay, but what we need to really focus on is that, are we really helping the population in Morocco? We know about immigration. We know that they are leaving their country. It's not because they want to do that, but they have to do that just to survive. So do we trust Morocco? Do we have confidence in Morocco or not? I think we should have confidence in Morocco. Let's look at the economic and political reforms. They can do that. They're capable of doing that. Mr. Bové, it's not just a case of simply saying no. We want to ensure that the economic and industrial policies are changed, they're transformed. We can only do that if we have equal footing, if we have a partnership based on confidence. Obviously, we shouldn't be lowering our guard. We should still be monitoring the situation, but let's try and implement all the improvements. Let's help them improve, initiate the improvements, and let's not support large multinational companies. So I would say yes.
Kaiser, now I give the floor to Mr. Kazak.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, there are many benefits in the agreement between the EU and Morocco on reciprocal liberalisation measures for agricultural, fish and fisheries products. They'll allow 70% of liberalisation, compared with 1% at present for EU exporters, and 55% liberalisation for Moroccan exporters. The elimination of tariffs will produce a gain of €100 million per year for European exporters. In this agreement, we're going to show our support for the democratic reform agenda in Morocco, its new constitution and the election of its Prime Minister by universal suffrage. That's totally in line with the more for more principle in EU neighbourhood policy. Given that 40% of the Moroccan population is employed in the agricultural sector, poverty and promoting peace and prosperity in the southern Mediterranean after the Arab Spring. If we really want to help our neighbours under the present circumstances, we need to be ready to make concessions ourselves. We've also addressed concerns on the agreement in a motion for resolution which calls, first of all, that Morocco continue to move along the road towards democracy and development, guarantees for European farmers, such as the effective setting up of the entry price system and quota limitations for Moroccan products which are sensitive in nature, also better implementation of ILO conventions, and equivalent measures between the EU and Morocco on the environment, water management and plant health rules. Finally, colleagues, Commissioner, as Shadow Rapporteur, I call upon colleagues to vote in favour of the agreement to maintain the EU's credibility in Morocco and send a clear signal of that we support the Moroccan government's efforts to reform. Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. ROMEVA y RUEDA. Thank you, President. I should have spoken before as draftsman for opinion in the Fisheries Committee. I drafted the opinion. I suggested in the opinion that we follow the Beauvais recommendation and therefore reject the agreement, but when we voted, the Fisheries Committee by 2 votes voted down my recommendation and wanted to vote in favour of the agreement. That's why I was forced to withdraw my name from the opinion. Some colleagues who voted against, I'm looking at Mr. Mato, might vote in a different way tomorrow. I hope so. But I could very much agree with the reasons that Mr. Beauvais gave. And let me summarise some of these ideas myself. The first one, the crucial one, the most important one. We stressed politically and legally that this should explicitly exclude the Western Sahara territories. This is something which other agreements, the ones with the US, have already done. It's nothing new, therefore it can be done. So for that reason alone, we'd have a real problem in supporting the agreement. But over and above that, it's not the only reason, President, over and above that, this treaty needs to be renegotiated to adapt it to the economic and social development which are sustainable and promote regional integration. We also called on the Commission to come up with a strategy that would deal with the challenges of the Arab Spring. That's crucial as well, but the treaty should promote regional integration and the strengthening of the democratic and political area. I don't think that that's the case here. We need to look at the protection of the environment and making sure that sustainable jobs are created. I'm not sure either that any of this is in there, and the increase in production through exports shouldn't lead to more child labour in the agricultural sector, which is unfortunately the case in Morocco at the moment. Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists, Mr. Tannock for 1 minute.
Stable North African kingdom with close historical relations across the Mediterranean with its nearest European neighbours. My group is in favour of all measures which ensure that Morocco remains a prosperous and stable country in North Africa, and welcomes the recent political and constitutional reform programme from the King, which have so far progressed peacefully without the civil wars that we've seen in other parts of the Middle East and North Africa. As a general political principle, we believe that the ENPI aid alone is not enough to stabilise the southern Mediterranean, and that in order to ensure economic growth, to provide us with the kind of jobs for the young Moroccans which will mean investment and tariff-free or reduced tariff access to our markets for the Moroccan exporters, including for agricultural and fisheries products. products. And this is a vice versa process. We hope that our finished goods, processed goods from the EU in these sectors will be able to be exported back to Morocco. So this agreement is a good one. The cake gets bigger for everybody. This does not mean that we do not support self-determination for the Sahrawi people through a referendum as agreed by the UN resolutions, and we are reassured that by the Commission that this will not be the case, that the Western Sahara question has got nothing to do with basically what is a trade agreement between Morocco and the EU.
Thank you. On behalf of the Confederal Group of the European United Left Nordic Green Left, Mr. Willy Meyer. My group will follow Mr. Bové's recommendation because colleagues from the Commission and the Council, you gentlemen know that this will benefit European multinationals and those people who own the property in Morocco. There were very few people in number, mainly members of the royal family. This is going to be a tsunami for small and medium agricultural production on this side of the Mediterranean and on the other side, despite the Arab Spring. You don't seem to have realised what you need to bear in mind, which is the democratic and social quality of products. You're not bearing this fact in mind. You're not looking at it at all. Morocco is being used as an example. What a fantastic example. In the last elections, 22% of people came out. There are still demonstrations going on. The people are in the streets, but you don't listen or see. The only thing you want to do is help out the multinationals, the European food giants who will crush small and medium Mediterranean production in Europe and in Morocco as well. The little of it that exists at the moment anyway. And of course the Western Sahara too. Once again, gentlemen from the Commission and Council, once again you are going to break international law. You don't seem to care. You don't care that territory doesn't belong to Morocco is covered by this agreement. Please behave in a way that's more dignified and more in line with international law. From the non-attached members, Mr. Sosa Wagner. 1.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. President. The Bové report has set out the terrible consequences that the adoption of this agreement would bring in its wake. This agreement, which increases quotas for certain fruit and vegetable products when the figures are not being complied with in the present agreement, is completely mad. Remember that the Spanish Federation of Fruit and Vegetable Exporters sent a petition to the Parliament's Petitions Committee about the massive entry of Moroccan tomatoes through Perpignan at a price under that in the agreement. Illegal situations like that have led European farmers into a competitive disadvantage. Our farmers, of course, have to comply with rigorous quality for environmental standards which are not always respected by our Moroccan partners. Finally, the question of the Sahara. According to the UN Charter, the Sahara is an autonomous territory and exploitation of its resources should be done for the benefit of the local population. Also, it's an area where the UN doesn't recognise Moroccan sovereignty. We in Europe should be pushing for the respect for international law. I'm in favour of an agreement with Morocco, an agreement which has rigorous inspections as far as quotas and prices are concerned, an agreement which works against dumping, doesn't exploit Moroccan farmers and helps our farmers here in Europe, and this agreement is nothing like that at all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we come on to backbench speakers.
Jeggle.
Mrs. Jeggle.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, the Agri Committee's position came out against and voted against the trade agreement with Morocco, and I think sufficiently. There shouldn't be any competitive disadvantage from this agreement for either side. We want Morocco to meet EU standards in respect of social standards, anti-dumping provisions, working conditions, environmental, health and safety and plant protection standards. We'd like to see the Commission monitor customs quotas. We also want to see minority rights in Morocco protected. The agreement has to be to the benefit of all of the population and needs to be negotiated with their agreement, and I include Western Sahara in that. I think that this should go for any agreement. Because of this, it's important that the EU remain a strong partner for Morocco. Stable democracy is linked to a stable economy and a high standard of living for people. Therefore, as shadow rapporteur, I will vote in favour of this agreement with the EPP. The no from the Agriculture Committee was a signal to both Morocco and the EU negotiating partners to be transparent and open. Let me just underline that members of this Parliament, including some from my group who are going to vote against this agreement, have earned my respect.
I give the floor to David Martin.
Thank you, President. I also welcome this agreement. Occasionally in politics you have to talk the talk as well as, and not just talk the talk, but walk the walk as well. And the European Parliament was rightly, during the Arab Spring and following the Arab Spring, strongly in favour of the democratic transitions that were taking place, strongly in favour of taking measures to encourage economic stability in North Africa. Well, this is our first chance to deliver on those promises. Trade, and I serve on the Trade Committee, is not an end in itself, but is a tool to promote economic stability and to reduce poverty. This agreement is an opportunity to deliver on our promises to Morocco and to the wider southern Mediterranean region. I believe it is not only a good deal for Morocco, but a good deal for the European Union and our producers. The protection of geographical indicators is vital for European Union interests and producers. The fact that sanitary and phytosanitary standards will be the same for European producers and Moroccan producers as a result of this agreement means that all producers will now be competing on the basis of a level playing field and should provide reassurances for European consumers. Of course, I understand the concerns of our southern colleagues, but I believe that the reassurances the Commission have given as regards to ensuring that they will monitor the maintenance of minimum prices, the application of quotas, that will be carried out. And of course, if the Commission failed to carry out proper and due monitoring, we will come back to this chamber and hold them to account for that. With that proper monitoring, with the safeguards that are in place, this is a deal that can work for Europe and a deal that helps to cement a fruitful relationship with our Moroccan partners. Thank you, President.
Mr. Hagland. 1 minute.
Herr talman, jag tycker att den här diskussionen visar väl att...
Thank you, President. I think that this discussion goes to show that this agreement is a good one. At the same time, of course, we've got to ask ourselves whether it will be positive for Morocco, whether it will support it in the right way. But I think the negotiations underway show that the Parliament rejected the partnership agreement, and we know how tricky the situation was at the time. It doesn't mean to say that it's an easy task to sign this agreement, but Morocco is a friend of the EU and vice versa, and sometimes you have to be tough with your friends. Thank you.
Anna Miranda
for 2 minutes, please.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. This debate is one where Parliament needs to give a clear political signal, and this needs to be twofold. First of all, promote agreements which promote sustainable agriculture that's sustainable socially and ecologically. Secondly, respect for international law and collective and human rights of the Sahrawi people. This agreement is in favour of an exporter model which will hurt farmers in southern Europe as well as Morocco. It will only benefit investment funds and multinational companies, and it won't help the environment on either side of the Mediterranean. There's no social or environmental clause. There's speculation with foodstuffs, and it'll give rise to unfair competition. It penalises small-scale agricultures here and in Morocco. It won't guarantee their right to produce, and they'll end up being cheap labour for multinationals. The people are really going to benefit from the agreement. And finally, according to international law, we're dealing with a political problem of decolonisation which has still not been solved. Obviously, we're in favour of Morocco's democratisation, of course. We support the ideas behind the Arab Spring, but that can't be an alibi for us to pressure us into backing an agreement which doesn't even have the Western Sahara ruled out of its field of application. The raw materials, the natural resources there belong to the Sahrawi people. Neither the Kingdom of Morocco or the EU has a right to negotiate about it. In its occupied territories, they plant and export fresh tomatoes, and they catch and export fish, where people in that area are forced to eat fish and tomatoes out of tins. We cannot back an agreement which will allow this unjust situation to continue and worsen. We need a political response from the Commission and from the Council and from ourselves here. A political response which is unambiguously in favour of free determination for the Sahrawi people, put an end to the marginalisation of the men and women in the Sahara and their collective rights as a people. Thanks very much. Thank you, Ms. Miranda. There's a blue card being shown by David Martin. Will you accept the question? Will you accept the question from Mr. Martin? Mr. Martin is using his blue card right.
Thank you, President. I just wonder if Mrs. Miranda can name the agricultural products that are grown in the Western Sahara and how many of them make their way to the European Union. The clue, by the way, is in the name Western Sahara.
I've got a report here, Mr. Martin, on tomatoes grown in various areas, and I'll be able to give you a copy of it. Our next speaker is Mr. Grobarczyk. 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. The EU is the biggest global importer of fisheries products. And since this is an important foodstuff, we need to look carefully at agreements that influence our own domestic products. This is something that's going to have an enormous effect on the environment and the fisheries sector. What we'll see here is a lack of competitiveness in relation to countries outside of the EU. So when we negotiate, we have to defend our own interests, and at the same time we have to see third countries respecting rules that we set out together with them. Let's not forget that poorly thought through liberalisation will destroy the domestic market and not be a good thing at all.
Thanks very much, Mr. Grobarczyk. Paul Murphy, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, President. Throughout the discussions on the EU-Morocco agreement, which liberalises trade in agricultural and fishery products, the Commission has repeatedly claimed and described this as a win-win deal. Can we be a little bit more precise here and to say that it's a win-win deal for major European agro-business, for a few Moroccan conglomerates, and particularly for the King of Morocco, who will benefit most from this deal, who owns 12,000 hectares of the most fertile land? It is a lose-lose deal for ordinary small farmers, for agricultural workers and fishermen in Morocco and in Europe. I'm in favour of trade that provides development economically and socially and contributes to a rise in living standards. But in order for that to happen, the rights of working people, of small farmers and fishermen need to be protected. That's not the case in Morocco. The most basic of trade union rights are not respected in Morocco. The right to form a trade union, the right to have strike action. Agricultural workers have been dismissed in the last years for trying to organise, and the result is extremely low level of wages and a race to the bottom in workers' wages and conditions. On top of that is the fact that Morocco is an occupying power in Western Sahara, and this agreement will increase the profit of those who benefit from that occupation. The reality is, in answer to David Martin, there has been a substantial increase in agricultural production, 2,800% in the last number of years. 60,000 tonnes of agricultural produce last year were exported from Western Sahara. This is owned not by ordinary people in Western Sahara, owned primarily by the king, as a recent report demonstrates, and by major multinationals. This produce is export-oriented, goes to Europe. The people of Western Sahara have not been asked, won't benefit from it. The agreement should be rejected.
Next speaker is Mr. Nick Griffin.
Mr. President, I can start by saying that Mr. Bové's report is so comprehensive that it's difficult to add anything to the excellent job he has done. But I will point out that, with agricultural wages in Morocco at an average of just €5 a day, trade liberalisation can only add to the desperate plight of farmers in Greece, Sicily and Spain. It's madness for the EU to give preferential treatment to big business concerns exploiting the Maghreb, while its banking elite force murderous poverty on hard-working people in our own backyard. Since not even the most crazed global warmist still claims that we'll soon be growing olives in Lancashire or oranges in Kent, it follows that we will have to continue to import such produce. Let us do so from our hard-pressed fellow Europeans in Greece, Italy, France, Portugal and Spain. Leave the farmland of Morocco to support farming families in Morocco, rather than helping international agribusiness swallow it all up and spit the human wreckage out on our shores as destitute and angry Islamist refugees. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr. Mato Adrover. Thank you, Mr. President. Hundreds of thousands of farmers in many regions of Spain can summarise their views with one word: no. We say no to this unbalanced agreement, no to an agreement which doesn't have any guarantees that customs duties will be paid and we will be able to prevent fraud, no to an agreement which allows unfair competition with our producers and means they're going to end up abandoning their land. Summarising, no to the disappearance of fruit and vegetable growing in Andalusia, Murcia or the Canary Islands. You shouldn't be surprised that we're saying no. It's a consistent no, just as the yes to the fisheries agreement was. We need to change direction here. We need to stand up for the same things we stood up for in agriculture last June. So we're going to vote against, and next Thursday we're going to vote against again because nothing has changed. No one should understand that this no is against the Kingdom of Morocco, a privileged partner which needs to continue to be a privileged partner. Morocco isn't at fault here, it's just the beneficiary of the Commission's inability to deal with the entry price regulation. This no is also a yes. Yes to our farmers. Yes to reciprocity. Yes to strict compliance with agreements. Yes to good relations between the EU and third countries. Yes to us to continue farming here in southern Europe, and also yes to guaranteeing quality with no to fraud. Thank you very much, President. Thank you, says the President in German. Bernd Lange.
Thank you, President. Yes, colleague, I have a totally different view. This agreement cannot be compared with the fisheries agreement. The fisheries agreement, it wasn't clear where the money that the European Union paid went to. Here, on the contrary, we've got clear rules as to who will benefit, and these are producers in Morocco, but also European investments. flowing into Morocco. So it's a completely different situation. And it's quite clear, colleagues, that with this agreement, we're not legitimizing the situation in Western Sahara. Of course, we still need a solution in the interests of human rights, and we make that clear in our resolution. But, colleagues, we certainly cannot send out a signal with regard to the Arab Spring that we are going to close off our markets as a general principle. We've got to find solutions for fair trade to ensure that there can be a change initiated through trade. And there are distortions in the EU in agriculture. That's true. So in the EU we need to ensure that our farmers can have some kind of prospect for further development. But what we can't do is simply cut off our borders, shut them up. That's something that we can't do. We would simply be ensuring that there's more disappointment after the Arab Spring. So I will certainly be advising my group to support this agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lange. Next speaker, Mr. Weigl. 1 minute, please.
Mr. Chairman, last December, the European Parliament voted against the prolongation of the fisheries agreement between the EU and Morocco, inter alia also due to the fact that, contrary to international law, Morocco has not produced evidence that the EU funds are used for the benefit of the local population, also in the Western Sahara. We also voted against because Morocco is infringing the independent rights to use its own natural resources to the people of the Western Sahara. Now, if in the European Union we recognize international law and human rights, then we have to be against any agreement with Morocco which excludes the possibility of trade with the Western Sahara, which is a part and parcel of the Kingdom of Morocco. I would suggest that this be heeded by all colleagues in the European Parliament who are enthusiastic about the democratic changes in Morocco, because the rights of the Saharan people are the benchmark of the democracy in Morocco.
So, Mr. Struan.
Mr. Weigl, there's a blue card question for you. For Mr. Tannock. Will you accept the question?
Okay. Yes. Yes, Mr. Tannock.
Mr. Weigl, I still don't see why a trade agreement which will allow Sahrawis who are also producers of agricultural products to export, presumably, to our markets is actually going to threaten their livelihoods or their rights to self-determination. I fully understand the Western Sahara question is a very key one. It was very different when it was a matter of EU money being dispersed under the fisheries agreement. This is about a trade issue, so why is trading with the Western Sahara violating their rights to sovereignty or self-determination? That's my question to Mr. Weigl.
Mr. Weigl.
Thank you for the question. Recently, I visited a refugee camp in Tindoufou, and there are a large number of such refugee camps in the Western Sahara, inhabited by people who had to flee from violence from their own towns and cities. They cannot cultivate neither fruit nor vegetables on their own land, and that's the gist of the problem.
Next speaker, Struan Stevenson. 1 minute.
President, I've heard a great deal in this debate this evening from the people who are saying no to this agreement about workers' rights, trade union rights, human rights and the abuse of those rights in Western Sahara. These are the same people who only a few weeks ago said no to the renewal of the Fisheries Partnership Agreement. Are they aware that more than 600 Sahrawi people immediately lost their jobs in Dakhla in a processing factory? Are they aware that 780 fishermen from Andalusia, the Canaries and Portugal lost their jobs, and these are not wealthy people? What about their rights? What about the rights of these people in Western Sahara that lost their jobs while all the bleeding hearts in here were talking about workers' rights? You should learn more about what the actuality is, the reality on the ground, before you take these votes, in my personal opinion. But let's listen to what David Martin said this evening and support this agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Das Wort hat Herr Kollege
Mr. Kaspari, 2 minutes, please.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident.
President, thank you. Members of the House. I think it's extremely interesting to see how we're all happy about the changes that the Arab Spring has brought with it, and then in all of these fine speeches we say that we have to help people in this region. In other debates we talk about the migration flows from North Africa to the EU because of the difficult political and economic situations in those countries. And all the time in our fine speeches we say we need to help these people. And here we have the opportunity to offer real help in a real region, in a real country. And people here are whinging and expressing concern. Now, expressing concern is fine. However, it's part of parliamentary procedure that these concerns be addressed. In the last few months we have used our time to deal with the concerns that the Agri Committee expressed and incorporated that in the resolution. We've named a number of framework conditions in the resolution, and we've said, for example, that if there are really negative effects for the EU agricultural sector, then we'll ask the Commission to act appropriately. However, I think it would be an extremely bad thing to send an initial message to Morocco that we reject this agreement. I think that we can see the importance of this when one of the Spanish ministers went not to an EU country for their first trip abroad, but to Morocco immediately after the elections in order to talk to the Moroccans. And I think that's a very clear signal that our political leaders recognise who we need to be talking to. So this is an important first step. The ramifications for our agricultural sector need to remain limited. We need to monitor that. But I don't think that this should be the reason for not backing this agreement. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. Panzeri for 1.5 minutes, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. One point where this Parliament in the last few weeks has found a wide measure of agreement is a realisation that we need to change neighbourhood policy vis-à-vis countries on the southern shores of the Mediterranean, because the changes that are happening there and the progress that's being made as far as democratisation is concerned, the Union needs to turn a page as far as its approach to these countries is concerned. Now we need to be consistent and not schizophrenic when we implement neighbourhood policy. It would be ludicrous and criminally wrong and biased if we just went calling for more rights in these countries and turned a deaf ear to economic and trade issues. These issues of legal rights, etc., are important and are being sorted out through a new economic and financial partnership which will allow these countries to develop. Democracy and economic and social growth are things that are closely interlinked. We need to have free trade and reciprocal concessions as far as our links with the Mediterranean are concerned. I'm concerned about Mr. Bové's protectionist attitude. He won't allow rights to become a reality in these countries. He's in fact standing in their way. For all of these reasons we should adopt this agreement. We should vote in favour of it in the Parliament. I do hope we vote yes tomorrow. Thanks very much, President. Thank you, says the President. Our next speaker is Mrs. Herranz Garcia for 1.5 minutes, please.
Presidente.
Thank you, President. Last year the Petitions Committee in this Parliament called upon the European Commission to change the entry price system for fruit and vegetables in the EU. This is allowing fraudulent entry of production from third countries. Olaf has in fact stated this very clearly. We're basically talking about Moroccan tomatoes. The same petition was rolled up in a declaration signed by the governments of France, Italy and Spain last year. This fraud could be sorted out by changing the COM in agricultural products. Because we can't do it simply by changing the customs code, Mr. Commissioner. We have been saying for years in the EPP that we need to stop making concessions to Morocco until the EU has the requisite instruments which will guarantee that the present agreement is being complied with and respected. Member States have to guarantee imports, says the Commission. What the Commission doesn't say is that the entry price system as it stands at the moment doesn't allow the customs at national level to carry out full traceability of products which are imported so that they can check there's no irregularity. Changing the COM in fruit and vegetables would sort out part of the problem, but at the moment the flaws and gaps in European legislation doesn't allow national legislators to do their work properly. Thank you, says the President. Next speaker is Mrs. Andres Barea. 1.5 minutes, please. Thank you, President. My delegation, Socialists from Spain, are worried about farmers, producers of fruit and vegetables. We sent 5 key proposals to the Commission which we thought were crucial if we were to vote in favour of this agreement. One was to regulate entry prices. 14 years ago we've tried to do this and were told by the Commission that it could be done in the CAP, but at the moment there will be a flood of goods coming on to our market. People who are growing oranges are selling them at less than 25 cents a kilo. The large amount of off-quota production is flooding our market in the most sensitive months. An impact study in the EU, as far as farmers' income is concerned, the average income of a farmer commissioner in Spain is lower than the professional minimum wage. This is a crucial issue. Then we've got plant health reciprocal measures. The key word is reciprocal here. Farmers are suffering on both sides of the Mediterranean. Our proposals from the Socialist Group make all of these demands, and thanks to an amendment tabled by Mrs. De Keyser along with myself, we call that there be reimbursement of farmers who suffer from this, but we don't want this as some kind of charity. We want to stand up for the dignity of European farmers. That's why we've sent these 5 requests to the Commission, which we hope that they bring in and sort this out, because at the moment we can't and won't vote for the agreement as it stands because we think it lacks these 5 essential elements. Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Roata, for 1.5 minutes, please.
The signing of the agreement between the EU and Morocco on the reciprocal liberalisation measures for agricultural and fisheries products has a political and an economic dimension. The agreement with Morocco represents a support to rural development policy, agriculture at local level, and support to the democratic process that's been put in train by His Majesty. This agricultural agreement is also a major part of the advanced status given Morocco in 2008. It also shows that the European Union supports the constitutional and democratic reform programme in place in Morocco. This agreement will also lead to a rapprochement between Morocco and EU, and it's our credibility that's at stake. We cannot drag our feet in bilateral relations, and that's why, colleagues, I commend the signing of this agreement to you. It's balanced, it's consistent, and it's necessary in order to rapidly launch a free trade agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Susta. 1.5 minutes, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. There's something that's more important than the interests of farmers in the south. You can't have peaceful and democratic growth in the southern half of the Mediterranean if we stick to our old nostalgic ways and give rise to anti-European feelings in that part of the world. A bilateral approach might have been better in many ways, but this agreement, I think, is a balanced one. It doesn't threaten many of our typical products. 6 out of the 15 ones for Morocco production will still be subject to quotas, and some other products where there is total liberalisation are not particularly significant as far as Europe is concerned. There's also extra protection as far as serious damage to incomes is concerned. It's not perfect, and there's also the question of the people of the Western Sahara. We need to have powerful political initiatives in the Union to promote our values of freedom and justice throughout the world. But you can't use the tragedy of the people of Sahara to try to protect certain domestic political interests. We need to look beyond ourselves and look at the questions of economic policy and trade policy, and that's why I'll be voting in favour of this agreement. Thank you, says the President. Our next speaker is Christofer FJELLNER.
Thanks a lot, Mr. President. Handelsavtalet med Marocko om frukt och grönsaker är mycket.
This trade agreement with Morocco is much more important than what might appear to be the case at first sight. Nothing would damage the situation more than closing off the market, our markets. We are one of the most important markets. There are major customs revenues at stake here. The lower the prices are, the higher customs duties are. That's a way of maintaining poverty in these countries. So this agreement is extremely important. We are moving away from our former policies and ways of doing things. Let's not forget that the Arab Spring started with the death of a fruit and vegetable seller. And I hope, therefore, that the Commission will continue on this path, and it will have an agreement with Egypt and Libya further down the line, and maybe even with Syria at some point. Because the best solution is to dismantle tariff and customs barriers. What we need to do now is help countries of North Africa. Trade will help to enhance people's living standards there.
Mr. Pargneux, for 1.5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Commissaire, permettez-moi.
Commissioner, if I may, let me just depict the political backdrop, which is essential for our discussion here. This agricultural agreement is essential for the advanced status, yes, but also in terms of the free trade partnership that we would like to see in place between the Kingdom of Morocco and the EU. Secondly, the democratic process as we've seen it with the legislative elections, parliamentary elections recently, these were transparent. We should be proud of that. And it's also a mark of the events in Morocco. The other thing that's very important are the efforts that have been put in by the new government, not least of all Minister El Othmani, who's been talking to their neighbours in Algeria aimed at solving the Western Sahara problem together with the UN as well. So I don't think that it's relevant to involve Western Sahara in this debate given progress we see elsewhere. Let's also not forget that this agreement is one that will ensure not only the protection of small-scale Moroccan farmers. 70% of Moroccan farms are less than 5 hectares in surface area. But also this agreement will favour European exports, agricultural exports that is. Let me also say to the Commissioner, what new measures would you like to take so that our farmers in the southern Europe can use or benefit from the Globalisation Adjustment Fund and benefit from EU support in that way. We'll be voting in favour of this agreement between the Kingdom of Morocco and the EU.
Giovanni.
Next speaker, Mr. La Via. 1.5 minutes, please.
Signor Presidente, signor
Thank you, President. President, Commissioner. We'll be voting on this on Thursday, and I object to the method of it. It's not possible to continue with bilateral agreements. What we need to do is move into multilateral agreements. Those are, by definition, much broader than the things we can achieve with an individual agreement. Every so often we do these bilateral agreements, and it's always farmers, European farmers, who have to pay the price. And I think that here the price is too high. That's why I'm telling you now that I'm going to be voting against on Thursday. I'll be voting against the agreement because it doesn't include, and of course Parliament can't modify the agreement, the so-called reciprocity. This is crucial. We are opening our market, whereas tariffs will remain as far as products we export to Morocco are concerned. But also we mean respect for production conditions and respect for European consumers. We're opening our markets without providing sufficient guarantees to our citizens. And we are also, of course, hurting producers in southern Europe, particularly those around the Mediterranean. That's why I'll be voting against. Thank you, Mr. President.
La Via.
Thank you, Mr. La Via. Our next speaker is Mrs. Coppa. 1 minute, please. President, up to now, a large number of people have asked us to look at this very complicated agreement. We have repeatedly stressed that trade agreements are eminently political, and we'll be showing this when we have the question with Uzbekistan and the agreement with them soon. This agreement is one where we are freezing our relations with Morocco because we haven't dealt with a number of key issues. It's important that the EU continues to work with Morocco on reforms in areas which are very important to us. Up to now, we've had a frank dialogue as far as policy is concerned with Morocco, talking about the possible association agreement. But at the moment, all we are doing is undermine that dialogue. Finally, if we are going to guarantee the interests of European farmers, we have an agreement. Also, the security aspects of this, the safeguard aspects of this, are not going to protect the European market from excessive imports of Moroccan products. I would ask the Commission to look at this once again. Thank you very much, President. Our next speaker is Mr. Dantin for 1.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, you're fulfilling your task very well, your post very well. You're defending this text with a great deal of conviction, but it's not your text, actually. It's somebody else's text. Because are you negotiating this text yourself? No. If you had done, it would have been different. You know that it's very difficult to impose on European farmers environmental constraints when texts such as these that are proposed to us simply cast this matter aside, sweep it under the carpet. It's difficult to set up a CAP framework because there's different living standards in the different countries. We're not taking into account the living standards of Moroccan producers. The situation is complicated. Yes. I don't think anybody here wants to call into question or undermine developments in Morocco. We need Morocco. We need it to be a pole of stability in North Africa. We know that it's another gateway to developing trade. That's important. But we want to make sure that both parties win. How are we going to explain to European farmers that we might impose on them the Water Framework Directive, but on the other hand we're letting high volumes of tomatoes come in? How can we justify the fact that the water table is being reduced by 2 meters every year? We've got to we can't just forget about this. We want sustainable development, and we're not helping that. Our farmers might not worry. It's true that the Moroccan farmers will probably die a death as well. It's both parties that are not going to benefit from this. We've got to be very careful in terms of making sure that we have environmental, social and economic balances. Thank you.
Colleagues, we now come on to the Catch the Eye procedure. A lot of colleagues have asked to speak. I'll fit in as many of you as I can, but that means you have to be very strict with your speaking time. I will be cutting people off if you overrun your minute. So let's begin now and start with Mr. Iacolino. Just 1 minute and no more.
Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. President. I listened very carefully to the Commissioner's comments on the Lisbonisation process, if I can call it that. But a lot of colleagues don't think that we've really played our role, or are able to play our role in the legislative process as far as the import of Moroccan fruit and vegetables is concerned. It's very important as far as many southern European countries are concerned. Geographical indications are lacking. There's a problem with plant health. We don't have proper quality standards, and in particular there's a lack of reciprocity. Our belief is very firm in favour of supporting the democratisation process in Morocco, but we can't vote in favour of an agreement which would unquestionably cause serious problems for a huge number of European producers who are going through a difficult period as competitiveness increases. Thank you. Mrs. Vergnaud.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. This partnership agreement with Morocco for agriculture and fisheries is an important document, together with a country that's shared history with Europe for centuries and is an essential trading partner, and with whom we have a net surplus. Now, I understand the concerns we've heard. But if this is going to be instrumentalized for political ends, then, if I thought that, then I would also question liberalisation in this very sensitive economic sector. That's why, Commissioner, we really need compensatory measures put in place to make sure that negative ramifications on production and European jobs are in place. Under that proviso, I can support the agreement because the Moroccan market is an essential one if we are to support the democratic process, something that we all support here in this country, which is strategically important in the Mediterranean basin.
Maria Patrão Neves.
Mrs. Patrão Neves. Not here. Mr. Silvestris.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, we are against this agreement and will vote against it. It'll simply lead to products being brought onto the market which cost less to produce than they cost to produce in Europe. Our farmers need to be told that we're voting no. People who grow cherries, fruit, tomatoes, we can't have them swamped by Moroccan products. And we're not certain, don't forget, about the environmental standards or the type of fertilizer used. as well as the conditions of work or pay for the people growing these in Morocco. Having these zero rated as far as duties are concerned, if that's going to happen, at least our products, our meat and oil, should have the same treatment when they get to Morocco. But that's exactly the opposite to what's happening. Companies and farms are going broke in southern Italy. People are leaving the land. This is simply going to exacerbate that process. We need to call a halt. My final point, Chairman, is that we support the Arab Spring. Let's have we don't want to have a European winter for our farmers, however. Thank you very much.
Ο κύριος Spyros Danellis.
Mr. Danellis.
Ευχαριστώ, κύριε Πρόεδρε.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, or Commissioners, the reactions to this agreement are two. First of all, there's the idea that some people object to the idea of it supporting or benefiting both sides. They think it needs to provide more protection for sensitive European products. Secondly, there's the question of the political question of the Western Sahara. But if we don't adopt this, we won't help the people of the Western Sahara. What we'll be doing is make that question even more complicated. At the same time, and the most important thing as far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't forget that moving forward with economic development and making it spread throughout the whole of the north part of the North Africa will lead us to, I think, an important element which began with the turning point of the Arab Spring. That should be our main goal in the European Union and in the European Parliament. So we say yes. Thank you, President. Our next speaker is Mr. Antinoro.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you, President. Obviously, a minute isn't nearly enough. All I can do is just make a couple of points rather than try to put forward a reasoned argument. The Arab Spring is something that's close to all of our hearts. Morocco has made progress. That's right and proper, but that doesn't mean that we should damage our agricultural economy because of it. It doesn't mean that we should penalise European agriculture, particularly agriculture in southern Italy. I'm not even from there myself. But I think some of the thinking has been wrong-headed. We are, in many cases, saying that the Arab Spring is the reason why we're doing this and why we should back this agreement. We actually are aware that not even the Moroccan farmers are going to benefit from this agreement. It's just the big financial groups who have taken over a large slice of that market. We're fully aware that, once again, we are putting the wool over the eyes of European citizens when we say things like that. We can't just have a Europe of financiers. We need to look at an agricultural Europe as well. The President, thanks very much. Mr. Ferreira.
Senhor Presidente, Senhor Comissário.
President, Commissioner, this is another agreement which will benefit the few to the problems of the many. The big multinationals will gain new markets. They'll be able to use cheap labour and get round social, labour and environmental standards which are in force here in Europe. Small-scale producers of Mediterranean products, particularly fruit and vegetables, will simply find their situation worse because goods will be dumped on markets at lower than production cost, and that will cause huge problems. Family farms, which will find themselves up against the intensive production of the big exporters, won't be able to keep up. Food sovereignty is vitally important. That will be imperiled as well. So the consumers on both sides will lose. The Commission is also, of course, closing its eyes to the Western Sahara, illegally occupied, and they are flouting international law as they do so. Thank you, Mr. Ferreira. Mrs. Patrão Neves. Thank you, President. We recognise the importance of political relations with third countries, particularly the Kingdom of Morocco and committed to good trade relations too, I still can't accept another step towards so-called joint liberalisation, which is in fact going to create a situation of huge inequality as far as competitiveness of European and Moroccan farmers. European farmers have to meet strict food safety and environmental standards as far as animal well-being is concerned, etc. This of course naturally increases production cost, and without the labelling and the traceability which has led European citizens to prefer their products to others. When we liberalise 55% of Moroccan exports into the European Union and increase concessions in the fruit and vegetable sector, that will be a huge attack on southern Europe production in Portugal, Spain, Italy, France, and Greece, all member states that are already having problems as far as their productive sectors are concerned, and once again they will see their farmers being sacrificed on the altar of other interests. Thank you, President. Thank you, says the President. Mr. Arlacchi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am not in favour of this agreement, and many S&D colleagues agree with me, for three main reasons. First, this agreement is a fait accompli. It is an additional example of an international action undertaken by the Commission without any consultation with the Parliament. And Commission Füle informed us that it is not possible to modify it. Second, the argument against this agreement, provided by colleagues concerned with the fate of the smaller European and Moroccan producers, are very strong. A precipitous liberalisation could bring, as it occurred already in many places, significant damages. I don't believe, moreover, that there is any connection between Arab Spring and democratisation on one side and the extent of tomato production in North Africa on the other. Third, the most important reason I am against this agreement is the fact that it does not mention one fundamental fact: the rights of the Sahrawi people, occupied and harassed by Morocco, the fact that these rights are not prejudiced directly or indirectly by its clauses. And I am very sorry that the Commission did not find the courage to clearly say that this agreement excludes the territory of Western Sahara. Thank you.
Okay. Η κυρία Κορέα Ζαμόρα.
Mrs. Correa Zamora.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me say a few words that I would like to express the views put forward by members of my delegation, Mr. Mato and Mrs. Aranth, and say that this agreement with Morocco is harmful and it will work against the interests of European agriculture in general, and particularly Spanish agriculture and Spanish producers. It's an agreement that has been constantly violated by Morocco in the past as far as quotas and entry prices are concerned. That's why we will be voting against. Although, however, as a member of the International Trade Committee, I would like to say that I won't be voting against trade negotiations with Morocco. In my committee will continue to work to promote trade relations with third countries, promoting trade and investment as the driving force for growth. Thank you, says the President. Mr. Scuria.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, I can't understand why we are hurting ourselves in this way. You've talked about Morocco as an important partner on the human level. Morocco is actually a kind of imperialist state which is illegally occupying some territory where the UN has tried and failed to hold a referendum. You're talking about democratic links with Morocco. In fact, only 22% of the people voted in the last election. There's a huge amount of illiteracy. Farmers, fishermen don't have the right to form trade unions, and basically all the property is owned by the king's family. It's a pity that no farmer in Europe can see the advantages of this agreement which seem so clear to you. Explain why our farmers, our fishermen aren't allowed to send their products under the same conditions that Moroccans are sending their products to us. Surely democracy is equal, but in some cases apparently some partners are more equal than others.
That's
the end of Catch the Eye. So on behalf of the European Commission, I give the floor to Commissioner Cioloș.
Thank you, President. I'd just like to clarify a few aspects that have been raised here. First of all, some of you spoke about unfair competition. I'd like to give some figures. There are 6 million tons of tomatoes produced in the EU. The concessions for Morocco proposed under this agreement is 0.8% of the tomatoes in the European Union, plus 52,000 tons. With the system of entry prices and the way these quantities are divided up by month, the tomatoes are limited from June to September, and for the rest of the year it's divided up by month. There was also talk of entry prices. I've listened to your remarks, and that's why I'm proposing to align the way in which entry prices are calculated with European Union taxation to avoid small quotas or small quantities of a product, meaning that the calculations are made on that basis. It is to eliminate that type of problem that we're proposing to improve the calculation of entry prices, and will follow the way in which member states make sure that customs controls are imposed at the border when this modification has been made. You spoke, some of you, about that would be to the benefit of multinationals and not small producers. I don't know if this is an agreement, a trade agreement, which will encourage the development of multinationals or a type of production. You know, in the EU, these types of things are defined by our own agricultural product policy. Morocco has its own agricultural policy, and we've presented this green plan, and Morocco undertook to support small producers during the negotiations. You also spoke about how land has divided up. The information which we have from Morocco, which is in the green plan, and the amount of land owned by foreigners is limited by 100,000 hectares, and there are further limits. At least, Mr. Bové, that's the information that we have from the Moroccan government. When it comes to sanitary and veterinary norms being respected, as I said in my introduction, in the controls at the borders, we make sure that the products from Morocco and products from elsewhere, from other regions of the world, respect the sanitary and phytosanitary veterinary norms imposed on our producers. We apply the same principles for Morocco, and the verification made by the FVO recently in Morocco shows that Morocco also has the capacity, the institutional capacity, with the institutions that they've set up to make sure that these controls are carried out. And the technical assistance program to Morocco will help them to reinforce these capacities in the future. You also spoke about the impact on the environment or on the use of water. The medium use of water for production of tomatoes in Morocco is 47 litres per kilogram, and in the EU it's 45 litres per kilogram. So that's pretty close to the medium, the average we have in the EU. So that's the calculation that's the average once again, Mr. Bové. And with the technical system that Morocco wants to develop, this water use will be reduced further. But it's not through an agreement that you can impose on a government something which is their responsibility. I think by respecting self-determination as in Morocco, and based on the information and declarations that we have, that can be the basis for decisions as in this agreement. I thank you for clarifications. I think my colleague Mr. Füle will give some further information on the aspects which are non-agricultural but which have also been raised in your questions.
Köszönöm, köszönöm a bizottságnak a megszólalását, és valóban Štefan Füle úr következik.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you for that comment. I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker.
Today's debate touches on many fundamental issues about the Europe we want to build. Do we want to build a Europe open to the world? Are we serious about establishing a close partnership with our neighbours? Are we serious about more for more and mutual accountability principle? The vote by this House on the agriculture agreement with Morocco will determine some of the answers to these questions. As my colleague Commissioner Cioloș stated, Morocco is an important partner of the European Union. We have concluded advanced status in 2008. The entry into force of the agriculture agreement will give substance to the advanced status. It will create investment opportunities for the European Union companies and help provide jobs in Morocco, therefore reducing the temptation to find better living opportunities abroad, stretching further our migration capacity and policy. Let me make three additional points. First, on Western Sahara. I would like to confirm that the post-Lisbon European Union is committed to do more in order to find a solution to the conflicts of our neighbourhood. We are also keen to promote regional cooperation in the Maghreb and support efforts made by Algeria and Morocco to normalise their relations. Many positive steps have been taken recently, and the Commission is determined to provide both political and technical support. We care very much about the human rights in Western Sahara. Overall, we consider that the situation in Morocco has improved over the years, and this movement needs to be encouraged further. We will continue to follow closely the events and intervene whenever appropriate, including by supporting trial observation and with specific démarches. On the occasion of the political dialogue with Morocco, we will continue to raise our concerns when appropriate. Let me make it clear that the de facto administration of Morocco in Western Sahara is already under a legal obligation to comply with the principles of international law, which provides that the activities related to natural resources are lawful as long as they are not implemented in disregard of the needs, interests and benefits of the local population. We are committed to monitor closely the impact of the agreement on the population of Western Sahara. We will use the existing Agriculture and Fisheries Subcommittee established by the Association Agreement to gather this information and to keep Parliament informed. And I welcome that Morocco has committed to provide information on the regional impact of the agreement. A second remark on the importance of agreement in the context of European neighbourhood policy and Arab Spring. Let me stress that the rejection of this agreement would send a negative signal to all our Arab partners engaged in the difficult process of democratisation and reforms, and for which greater trading opportunities with the European Union will be a source of job and economic growth. More broadly, let me recall that this Parliament has, last December, supported the new approach to the European neighbourhood policy, and in particular to the vision of the gradual economic integration of our neighbours in our internal market. So let me stress that despite what some of you said, we have a strategy to support forces behind Arab Spring. You voted for it, and opening of markets was an integral part of it. The agreement with Morocco is indeed a building block of this exercise, and its adoption will send a very positive and encouraging signal to all our neighbourhood partners in the east and south. And on resolution, a third point, let me conclude by thanking members of this House for the positive collaboration in the preparation of the resolution. We take your resolution very seriously. My colleague has indicated a number of areas of concern to the Parliament where we will work intensively once the agreement with Morocco enters into force. In particular, recognising your concerns, the Commission will monitor closely the effect of the agreement both in Europe and in Morocco, and in all policy dimensions. The monitoring will start on the first day of the entry into force of the agreement, and it will be a continuing process. And let me make also, in this context, a remark that a lot has been made to meet most out of the 5 demands mentioned by the Spanish parliamentarians from the SD group. Also, the Commission will launch an impact assessment for the negotiation of the deep and comprehensive free trade area with Morocco and other partners in the South Mediterranean. I am keen to ensure that the Commission will deliver on its commitments, and you can count on our personal engagement to this effect. Thank you very much.
Köszönöm szépen, és most
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And now I give the floor to Mr. Wammen for the Council Presidency.
Herr Formand,
President, members, Commissioner, thank you for a very good debate. I would like to underline that the agreement, which will be voted on later in the week, is incredibly important symbolically for the cooperation between the EU and Morocco. So I'm happy that the support from a number of Parliament's members, Mr. Kasai, Mrs. Keyser, Mr. Martin, Mr. Lange, and many others. It's an expression that if we want to strengthen developments and cooperation in North Africa, we must show this through concrete measures and create economic advancement and link ourselves together. And that is the very goal of this agreement. And otherwise we would send the wrong signal to Morocco and other countries in Northern Africa. To Mr. Bové and many other members who expressed their scepticism and their opposition to the agreement, I respect your views, but I disagree with your conclusions. I'd like to point out that the agreement contains provisions which gives the right to the EU to limit imports from Morocco if it upsets the European market in a significant way or damages production, and also takes into account products which are very sensitive in the EU. There's no political agreement which is completely black and white when you make compromises. With this agreement, however, is extremely important because it sends the first important signal to North Africa, having seen the Arab Spring. It's now that the EU has the possibility to put actions behind the very fine words and the strong values in the form of an agreement which very specifically marks a difference for people in North Africa. An agreement which will send a clear message that the EU is acting, that the EU stands behind democratization, behind free trade, behind a partnership which is based on trust, on trade and democratic values. Therefore, it's more than a question of trade. When the members of this Parliament vote on Thursday, it's a question of how far the EU will stand behind the promises we've given about close cooperation and supporting the democratic reform forces which need our support and deserve our backing. With those words, on behalf of the Council, I would very much urge all members of this Parliament to vote in favour of the agreement. Thank you very much. And now the rapporteur, Mr. Bové, has the floor.
President, Commissioner, the Council representative. Well, it was a very interesting debate, despite everything. I think it was a real debate on a free trade agreement. Some people talk about ideology, some people talk about beliefs, some people talk about the facts, i.e. free trade agreements meaning a march towards democracy. I hope those people will hopefully not be in a situation that people who've been victims of FTAs have had to deal with. Fruit producers, meat producers, looking at the Mercosur agreement. So this is a bad agreement, especially for Moroccan farmers. So if it is voted in favour of, that would mean that all conditions for the Arab Spring would then finally come to Morocco. That would be a very strange situation tomorrow. Because in the agreement, if we see that there'd be an increase of 50% of European products to Morocco, whereas 15% would come from Morocco, that would mean that hundreds of thousands of Moroccan families will be thrown onto the streets because of those exports from Europe. Is that what you want? I seem to hear today that people aren't they're refusing to talk about reality. You're refusing this agreement because Morocco is saying that it will stop migration from North Africa. Are we actually going to have economic agreements based on having a wall through the Mediterranean to protect Europe? Let's be serious. Come back to actual facts. The facts are on the ground are farming. This is a bad agreement for farmers. 1% increase to get prices down. Commissioner, you know this very well. Demand supply is a very delicate balance. 1% might push people out of jobs. We know that tomatoes are coming in. We know that the multinationals are based in France. We know that. So why do we continue saying the things we say? When the Commission has those documents saying that over 700,000 hectares have been given to an Arabian investment fund, a Persian Gulf fund, you can't deny the fact that those documents belong to the Commission, that they prove this fact. So, similar to what we said about water, when we say there that all these European universities, Dutch, French, Spanish universities that have come up with the figures, plus also Moroccan universities. I don't want to speak at greater length. On Western Sahara, I didn't want to make that a political battle horse. I just want to talk about the rights there. Western Sahara wasn't excluded from this agreement, so you might see European Court of Justice being brought into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 6 resolutions which we received at the end of the debate. I now close this debate and the vote will take place at Thursday noon. Ladies and gentlemen, our next agenda item is a question on the feasibility of the introduction of stability bonds. The first speaker is Mrs. Bowles.
President, Commissioner, I am presenting this oral question and resolution on behalf of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee. We postponed the debate from last Strasbourg as Commissioner Rehn could not attend, so we are disappointed that once more other duties have called. We are well aware in the committee of all the strands of the arguments, from those that inherently support common stability bonds to those of the opposite view, but in some form we are of the view that they are part of the picture. If we look back at our attempts to stabilise the Eurozone crisis, then it can be characterised as believing that within a monetary union a small part would not bring down the whole, just as a city or state does not bring down the US. There has been the belief that because of political commitment of the whole, the deterioration in a highly indebted member state would not follow the path of that experienced in other individual indebted countries. We can blame delay and prevarication for our attempts always being behind the curve, but it is time to examine missing elements too, including the fact that what we do also marks the level of ambition and commitment to the next stage of evolution of the monetary union and to the euro's place as a reserve currency. In other words, ambition counts, maybe even more so in this time of awful austerity. Therefore, we are anxious to learn what are the interim results of the consultation on stability bonds, and based on the consultation, what are the next steps foreseen by the Commission. Further, since the issue of the Green Paper in October, there have been further political agreements, such as those of the European Council in December, which have also been carried forward. These decisions to enhance sustainability of public finances also contribute towards creating the necessary conditions for the potential introduction of stability bonds. Therefore, what kind of policy instrument would be the most effective in the short term? As I said, with regard to ambition, stability bonds would show that there is a medium-term plan beyond austerity. The redemption pact proposed by the German Council of Economic Experts shows a long-term way that excess debt could be handled, and there is some similarity in that plan to how the Australian states first moved to common issuance. Neither should we overlook the possibility of short-term euro bills. I dubbed these once the beginner's bond. But they could be both time and quantity limited, with good behaviour needed to allow rollover. Bills also have the advantage of lower interest rates, and in these times of high debt, struggling fellow member states do need every single basis point squeezed off what they have to pay. Now, from a personal point of view, taking that overriding necessity of squeezing down debt servicing payments, I would see eventual recirculation of the profit element of bond interventions by the European Central Bank, recirculation back to the indebted member state, as a reasonable manoeuvre. Thank you, President. I haven't taken all my time. I would be happy if you would allocate the rest to the Parliament's rapporteur, Sylvie Goulard. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you very much. The Commission is here, and now Commissioner Kroes has the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honourable members, it is a pleasure for me to replace my dear colleague Olli Rehn. The consultation on the Green Paper on the stability bonds finished on the 8th of January, and it's fair to admit that the feedback via the official channels of this consultation has been quite limited. We have received only 18 replies to the Internet questionnaire or DG ECFIN's functional mailbox, and these replies came mostly from private citizens and to a smaller part from different institutions. Thus, I would hesitate to consider this feedback as representative. I would also hesitate to consider those